I once spent 10 hours preparing for a 3-hour D&D session. Do you want to guess how much of it my players saw? About 15 minutes. I get it. You want to make your world feel alive and be prepared for anything that your players might throw at you, but over-preparing is just procrastination dressed up like productivity. So today, I'm going to break down how I went from a burnt-out perfectionist to a flexible DM with a preparation plan that actually works. And spoiler alert, it involves a lot less writing than you might think. Let me take you back to where it all started. A cramped living room with a hand-drawn map and my cousin running what felt like the most immersive game I have ever played. The NPCs had accents, the world had a history, and... well, looking back on it now, it might have just been the funny accents, but it felt immersive at the time. Anyways, that game is what got me so interested in Dungeons & Dragons and made me want to start dungeon mastering for myself. And when I started, I did what every new DM does. I dove in headfirst and immediately hit the bottom. My first major campaign was a fully custom homebrew world I had created called Legend of the Leylight, and I went pretty hard. We're talking things like custom pantheons, a 10,000 year long history, unique economic systems specific to their own continents. You get the idea. I had written about ancient ley lines, cosmic events, and a war between forgotten gods, and none of it mattered when the party decided that the most pressing quest was to steal from the tavern. In response to this, I started to do what every single over-enthusiastic dungeon master does in this situation: start writing novel-length session prep notes. Pages of potential dialogue, every possible check result mapped out with contingencies upon contingencies, all written out and planned like I'm some sort of sick mastermind. But the craziest part about it all is I genuinely believed I could predict every choice the players would make. Spoiler alert number 2, I could not. No matter how much I prepared, the players always went somewhere unexpected. And that's probably the hardest and most important lesson for any new DM to learn. Anyways, it didn't take long before that all of that session prep started to feel less like a safety net and more like a chain holding me back to a version of the game that no one was actually playing. And eventually, it led to heavy burnout. Now, there wasn't some dramatic moment when I realized I was burnt out. It kind of just crept in slowly, session by session. I'd spend hours preparing what I thought was the perfect narrative, only for my players to kick down the door, ignore plot hooks, and spend the next 40 minutes interrogating a bartender I had written exactly one sentence about. My notes were too rigid, and if my players went off script, I felt off balance for the entire night. I'd spend valuable session time flipping through pages trying to find something I could salvage. Eventually, I realized that the problem wasn't my players, it was how I was prepping for my games. I was trying to write a novel for a story that me and my players were supposed to be writing together. The truth is, you can't plan for everything, and you definitely shouldn't try to. Because D&D isn't a movie manuscript, it's improvisation and reactive. The moment it really clicked for me was kind of this little story arc we had in my last campaign. It was a panicked improv where my party decided to go to a random city and interrogate a guard I had never even named. So in that moment, I made something up on the spot. His name was Quinn. He was nervous, a little jumpy, too young for the job, and desperate to do well even though he was clearly in over his head. And in about 2 minutes, Quinn went from being a throwaway nobody NPC to one of the most beloved characters in that session and eventually the entire campaign. The players latched onto him instantly, asking how he was doing every single time they came back to town. He was still that same kid in over his head, and because of his interactions with the party, got promoted to the guard captain of that city, and eventually was promoted to a leadership role within the political structure of the Capital Guard. All of this from one panicked improv session where I didn't have something planned. I'm not entirely sure where along the storyline I realized it, but that's where it hit me. Most of the time, the best parts of the world and the ones that feel the most real are the ones that you don't spend hours writing. They're the ones you created together on the spot in one panicked improv session. After Quinn, I realized I couldn't prepare the same way I had been doing it before. I didn't need a script for my session prep, I needed a framework. And that realization completely changed how I prepare for my sessions. Now my session prep looks something like this: key locations that the players might visit, important NPCs they might meet, motivations behind those NPCs, and a couple of major events happening in the background. This gives me enough structure to stay grounded in the world without boxing myself into some rigid plan. It also frees me up to focus on what the players are actually doing rather than scrambling through pages of prep trying to find something that fits. When I started doing this, everything about my sessions changed. The game felt smoother, more natural, and just way less stressful. Instead of feeling like I was falling behind or missing something, I actually felt like I was ahead of the game. I could improvise more confidently because I wasn't carrying the weight of 100 unnecessary details in my notes. Prep wasn't about writing the story anymore, it was about knowing the world well enough so that the story could happen no matter the decisions the players decided to make. And honestly, that shift made DMing not just easier, but way more fun for both me and my players. But now, let's talk about the tangible tips you can actually use to make your session prep easier, faster, and more effective. First off, the most important thing is to know the foundation of your world. You don't need a 5-page history for every village, but you do need to know the basics, being your geography, your major factions, and just the broad strokes of your culture overall. If you understand how your world works at a high level, you can make up the small details on the spot without feeling random or inconsistent. This means if you're running a module, you should do your best to try and read the whole thing. You don't need to memorize every text box, but you should have a good understanding of the big picture overall. Where it starts, where it's going, and the important moments that tie the whole story together. Having that overview makes it a lot easier to stay flexible when your players take a left turn off of a mountainside. Secondly, expect your players to go off the rails. They're going to do it. It's not if, it's when. So instead of trying to predict every step they take, try to build your world to support multiple paths. Think about what's going on around them, the next town over, rumors they might hear, or factions they could bump into. You're not prepping scenes, you're prepping possibilities. Thirdly, use a flexible structure for your notes. Bullet points, short lists, simple flowcharts, whatever you use to stay organized without locking yourself into some sort of rigid script. The goal isn't to write a novel, it's about giving yourself enough material to improvise confidently when your players do inevitably throw you a curveball. And finally, focus your prep time on what matters most. Focus on the things your players are most likely to interact with during that session. Things like major NPCs, key locations, important plot threads, and kind of let everything else stay light until you need it. And to give you an idea what these notes look like in practice, these are my session notes. Nothing fancy, it's pretty much just 2 columns, one with a basic overview of what's going on, and another column of things to remember that I might be likely to forget. Under basic overview, I pretty much just write down the basic gist of what I expect the session to be. This includes a couple of story beats or narrative threads that they might interact with, along with a little bit of information for each of them. And the other column is pretty much just a quick reference, things to remember. In this case, it's a list of named NPCs for a bandit crew that they're likely going to be interacting with during the session, alongside some information about a player's subplot who left money for an unlucky family. But that's pretty much what my entire prep looks like now. The beauty of this format is I'm never stuck flipping through a notebook trying to find something that I wrote down. Everything I need is right here. This style keeps me prepared enough with the core details, but not over-prepared. But part of what makes this prep style work really well for me, and these notes in particular, is the fact that this is a world I created myself. This is a homebrew setting, and by the time I actually ran this session, I had a really solid understanding of how things fit together, whether it be the towns, the NPCs, the factions, and just the tone of the general adventure overall. And that understanding of the world as a whole made it very easy for me to keep my notes light. You don't need to write every little detail out because you already know how the world will feel and react to the player's actions. So when something unexpected happens, and it always does, you won't have to panic. You're just plugging in those decisions into a world you already understand and telling the story. Now this might all sound very conceptual at best, so let's flip the perspective to see what the players would see if you utilize this kind of session prep. There is a common misconception that if DMs know where the story is ultimately going to be going, or if there are certain events that are going to happen regardless of the player's interactions, that must be railroading, that there is some sort of illusion of choice. But that is not what is happening here. Every campaign has a story. That's not railroading, it's just structure. What matters isn't what the players are moving towards, it's how they get there. The decisions they make and the paths they carve out while doing so is where the real game lives. So yes, maybe from behind the screen you realize a major plot event is coming. Maybe your party is going to clash with a certain villain, or a major truth about the world will be revealed, but the way they get there, that is entirely up to the players. And because your prep is flexible, regardless of where the players go with that major event, you can still bring those story beats to life in a way that feels earned and not forced. From the player's perspective, they're making choices that matter. They're shaping the story with their actions, even if you as a DM have an idea or a sense of what's waiting ahead of them in the next sessions. That's not an illusion of choice, that's choice. Guiding a story isn't the same as railroading. You're not taking control away, you're just making sure that there is a road when they decide to start walking. And when the players feel like the world is reacting to them, that's their story unfolding. They get more invested, they engage more, and care more about the game. When your players are this invested in the story, you start to feel something too. You're not just running the game anymore, you're a part of it. And the funny thing is, they're not seeing any of the prep work you did or didn't do. What they're responding to is your confidence. Because that's the real secret of a good DM. It's not about knowing everything, it's about acting like you do. Confidence sells the world. When something unexpected happens, and it will, you don't panic. You take a breath, think how the world would naturally respond, and then you move forward like it was always supposed to happen that way. So prep enough to stay grounded, know your world, and trust yourself and your players to make the story something better than you could have ever planned. But what do you think? If this helped you rethink how you approach session prep, even just a little, consider liking the video and subscribing. I've got plenty of D&D stories, tricks, and breakdowns coming. But until next time, thank you very much for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.